Okay, good morning, everybody. This is the Finance Committee on May 12th. We'll get started. We have two agenda items. The first agenda item is we would like to discuss vehicle purchases. Actually, about a year ago, we had the same conversation. So we talk about our bus fleet and looking at our bus fleet to make sure that our buses are where they need to be, that we're not spending more money in repair than moving forward with purchase. So Mr. Nate Bray has joined us. If there's any questions that or comments that he needs to chime in, he will do so. At this point, what we are looking at is we're looking at some of the oldest buses. They're about 16, 17 years old. At this point, for those committee members that were here last year having this discussion, we had a discussion about some buses that had a GM chassis that no longer is being supported by GM or made. So we have two more buses that still have that chassis. And those are two of the buses that we're looking to replace. They are two 84-passenger buses. They were introduced into the fleet in 2005 and 2006. So they are two of the older buses, the last of the two older buses, I believe.
Ms. Green, if I can just cut in for a second, that's flipped. Those are the two that are actually a little bit newer. That's the 2009 and the 2010 are that chassis. The other two are Bluebirds.
Thank you. That's why Nate is here. So at this point, we are recommending that we replace two 48-passenger buses and two 84-passenger buses. A little bit of a head scratcher with, I think, what is happening in everybody's personal life as far as the economy and where inflation is. The prices that are coming in for the buses are about 33% higher than what we paid last year. We don't anticipate that those numbers are going down anytime soon. Once we move forward with purchasing the bus, it takes about a year for us to actually get the bus into our fleet. So Nate and I have been talking about, do we think that the numbers will be driven down? I do not believe so. I think once those numbers are there, they'll pretty much pricing will stay there. I don't think it'll come down anytime soon. I don't think a month or 2 months are going to make a big difference. They actually might go up depending on the economy and how everything pans out. So at this point, a 48-passenger bus is about $131,000. And I'll give you the preview from last year. We paid about $98,000. So it is about a 33% markup from what we paid last year. Again, I don't see in the near future that those numbers are going to come down back near the $98,000 for those buses. For the 84-passenger buses, the current estimated price is about $178,000, and we paid $133,000 last year. These numbers are estimates. We're still waiting for finalized pricing, but I wanted to bring this forward because, again, it takes about a year once we move forward and get board approval and order for us to actually receive the buses and get them on the fleet and get them where they need to be. So my recommendation is that we move forward if everybody's agreeable with this purchase. We will put the board motion that it is an estimate, and final pricing will be reviewed by myself, Dr. Yannicone, and Mr. Bray. We can update the Finance Committee on the final prices. If it is a major swing from the numbers that we're talking about right now, obviously we'll revisit that and won't move forward. So if there's any questions, and funding for this is the Capital Reserve Fund. We annually put money aside into the Capital Reserve Fund for this process. Any questions from anybody? Comments?
Yes, I have a question. What do we do with the old buses? Is there a trade-in? Can we sell them? Is there any monetary value from the ones that are going to be retired?
Sure. Nate, do you want to take that?
Sure, absolutely. So it sort of depends on what we are retiring. In the case of all four of these, our best choices are probably going to be either a direct trade with the dealership, which is often a little bit lower value depending on the vehicle itself. We also have had some success in the past with an auction that is specific to school buses that really worked well for us the last time that we did it. So we kind of assess the condition of the vehicle, take a look at whether we think that the auction will be beneficial. which is just jumping through a few more hoops, obviously, than a direct trade with the dealer. But if we think that we can get a little bit more money back on the vehicle, we'll go ahead and do that. I believe that probably 2 to 3 of these, we might be better off to auction. Likely returns on them are not super high. That could be anywhere from maybe $1,500 to, I would say, $5,000 if we're lucky. The last time we auctioned one of the 84 passengers, we got what I would say is incredibly lucky, and it went for about $8,000. I wouldn't call that characteristic. I thought that was a higher number than what we expected. So the hope would be 1,500 to 5,000, somewhere in there. One of them, just based on its current condition, it is still roadworthy. It will still pass inspection. However, I might recommend that that one just be a direct trade with the dealer. That would probably be around $1,000 or so.
I know this may be something you're talking about, but I remember at a previous meeting, we had talked about electric buses and sort of moving towards more environmentally friendly. So I don't know if that's in the consideration also.
Sure. So Nate and I meet weekly. We have this conversation all the time about, alternative transportation. As you know, in property committee, we're having discussions about the bus depot. So electric buses is something that is a buzz. I think the technology and things are still being weeded out with that. One of the big factors for us would be, we'd really have to seriously look at finding a property that would be able to allow us to run electric buses. Our current depot would not, especially with the flooding. I think that would be a perfect storm for a disaster if we're looking to do that. So I think it's a bigger conversation, but it's something that obviously we're keeping our fingers on the pulse with it, because it's a buzz in the transportation world, and just in general and personal lives, that people are transferring over into electric and energy saving. So it is a conversation. Definitely we will keep going. At this point, that it's something that's down the road for a number of years, because we'd have to put the infrastructure in place. There'd be a lot to do before we even went down that route. And I think us replacing these buses we wouldn't be in a position about electric buses and not replace these buses, if that makes sense. Do you need any more information on the electric buses, or are we good? Okay.
I wanted to talk about electric buses again. Is there any merit to using this replacement as a test for our own ability to support electric buses, or how well they could integrate into the fleet, right? I don't know anything about the infrastructure that would be required, and certainly, Mr. Bray, for you, there'd be some logistics issues. But if we didn't think about a full fleet swap, right, but said, if we got 2 to 4 of these electric buses in, could they be kept in a separate location that would require less infrastructure, so that we could test and learn reliability, get good data on whether or not, when we do look at a new depot, do we want to actually flip the entire fleet, right? Because that would be a much bigger financial endeavor.
Understood.
Essentially use it as a pilot.
Understood. I am going to actually have Nate speak on this. Go ahead, Nate.
Sure. If we dip our toes into electric buses, that would certainly be my recommendation, regardless, that we, start slow, not do an entire fleet changeover. Right now, the current pricing of an electric vehicle, before looking at any grants that are currently available, we're talking about 3 times the cost of the diesel vehicles. So they're a pretty significant greater expense right now. Next week, actually, I'm going to be attending an Eastern Pennsylvania Alliance for Clean Transportation session, where the EPA is going to talk to us about some of the funding that's becoming available. And PICO is going to be there. PICO is looking to partner with some districts or contractors as far as their infrastructure abilities. So as far as the option to look at it and keep a couple of buses in another location, I think that would be a challenge in that other locations are still going to have some upgrades to the electric infrastructure before they can really support the charging needs for those vehicles at this time anyway. The charge time on the current infrastructure, I think at any of our buildings would be pretty significant. It would also take some of our drivers, put them at another location where it's a little bit more risky, I'll say, just in making sure that somebody shows up for work, making sure that there's direct supervision and direct support on site for those few drivers that would be going there. So I think that it would pose a few challenges to us. It's something, you know, we are watching the electric market. We are looking at it. I would say I would sooner be interested in trying to make sure that we could do what we could to maintain the fleet in one area, or it's already split across two areas. You know, if we can stick with that, it would be good. And if some of the things that we hear from the EPA or some of the things that we hear from PICO become an option, I think it's something that the district can be interested in. And once again, agreed, I think that a good start would be maybe 2 of them, so that we can start to learn about them, start to see what the actual range versus predicted range is. Another mild concern anyway, or something to at least think about in advance, is right now they're saying we should get maybe 8 to 10 years out of the vehicle. Our fleet replacement plan tries to look at about 12 to 15 years where possible. So something we would have to consider in advance is what we think we'll get out of those batteries. Are we going to get more life because we're a smaller district and maybe don't have to charge them quite as frequently as what a larger district would? Or are we going to get maybe 8 years down the road and need to look at replacing batteries? And I think right now it's challenging to understand what a battery replacement cost is going to be, because when we look 8 years ahead, I think that battery technology is going to be different. And we won't know if we're paying more for a greater range or if we're kind of paying the same for, you know, it's just an X factor there.
Did that address your question, Mr. Bedard?
It addressed my question, yes.
Are there any other questions around
Yeah,
this?
I think Sarah and Ms. Hughes and Dr. Teretuski have their hands up.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Braid. It's really helpful to hear your sort of expertise and perspective on this, because I understand it's very, when you're on the ground with work and then having like a board say, but we want this thing, or we're interested in this thing, to like help give us more of a sense of the reality of the moment, right? And so I want to own that it's very easy to be like, oh, we're interested in electric, and hearing sort of the logistical concerns around it is really helpful. I think one question I had though is just, I understand that it's more cost prohibitive in the present, but I'm just curious of the financial projections. My understanding with electric is that the payoff is, a few years down, then there actually seems to be a much larger savings. And I don't know if this is true. This is a little bit of a whisper down the lane thing, but I have heard that, our police force in the township invested in some electric cruisers for their fleet, and that they have already seen significant decrease in costs after just 2 years out. So I don't know if that's a rumor, or I would love to substantiate that with like actual data, but I'm just curious if there's other districts or other places where we can look if there's people who are a few years out from us in that conversion process of what kind of savings it yielded a few years out. The other thing just related to that too, and this is, I'm curious, Mr. Gray, this is a limit in my understanding of the technology, but the charging stations for the buses, if they can be the same for other cars, electric cars, and I know that like the buses need to be stored and so this doesn't work, but I was just trying to think outside of the box and just thinking, if our police force is already moving towards more electric cars and there's more residents that have them, like, is there an opportunity for a charging station in the township? I'm just curious what the like longer term vision of moving the township towards more electric vehicles is, and how the school district might like connect into that larger plan for the township. And then the last thing I'll just say, and then I'll stop and folks can respond, is, I definitely understand the limits on the battery technology. And I think, there is, I think there's more opportunity, and it is going to increase because now the market forces are kind of driving it to move faster. But I'm also just curious, as you're out in the field at these conferences and stuff of just hearing and learning what, is it too early to invest, or is the battery technology like good enough now compared to even just a couple years ago where it is the time to move forward? Because I understand that, yeah, you don't want to invest too early in it, and then 2 years later, they're like, now we have a battery that lasts 3 times longer.
I'm going to actually jump in on some of the things that you spoke about. So one of the things that we can most certainly do, and I can lead, is to get a financial projection, a 3 to 5 year on this topic, so that we can do some research on prices now, do some research on organizations that are actually using it, such as if our township is, then obviously that would be a great set of data for us. I can tell you in the business administrator group in Monco, this question came up, and I believe Upper Marion is starting with the charging stations, just as you're saying, for vehicles, not the bus fleet. They're not getting electric buses, but charging stations for vehicles that are electric from their community and from high schoolers or parents. So they're just starting that this year. So everybody is very, very interested in the data that's going to be produced by Upper Marion with what they're doing. But they're in Montgomery County, they're the first that's kind of spearheading this. So I think everybody's in the wings waiting a little bit to see how this goes. And then I think it will progress. So we can most definitely put together some projections, some longer term projections with estimates and information that we're gathering on cost savings and when that break even point comes and what that looks like. And we can most definitely move that forward to property and have that longer term discussion.
Super, thank you. And I would say only if other board members are interested. I'm not interested in having Ms. Green do extra work just because I'm interested in that. And so I would like to hear from my colleagues if that is of interest, because I don't want to encourage extra work.
I just wanted, yeah, yeah. I was actually kind of going to suggest that this really feels like there needs to be just more information. You know, the things that Nate, that you were sharing about, you know, quality of batteries and space and, you know, the need for supervision, all of that, like what the impact sort of more globally is going to be for the district. I don't, you know, I want to be clear that, you know, a lot of good things need to happen, you know, sustainability and environmental protections are certainly things that we need to think about. I don't want to say that this is a okay, we'll go with cost over the best thing to happen. So I want to consider sort of all of the factors that that are at play here. So I feel like it's not just a financial decision. You know, it certainly, that's the biggest part of it, but I do feel like there are certainly other factors about that. And I guess I was under the assumption that maybe Lower Marion has some electric buses in their fleet, but I may be wrong. I thought there were other districts that already do have them.
I can double check that.
Okay.
I'm going based off of the people that answered. So I don't know if Lower Marion did or didn't, but I will verify that.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that they do. So if we could check with some of the other districts that may have already gone there to see what that looks like. You know, Lower Marion is a district with limited space also, and they have some challenges with regard to that. So I think whatever we could learn from our partners, and as well as, you know, what Nate's going to gather from the conference or the meeting that he's going to, I think all that information would be really helpful to not only to this committee, but also property and the larger board, because I feel like this is just a big discussion here. Thanks.
Absolutely.
If I could just add my 2 cents, you know, as we talk about things like electric buses, and then of course we're getting into this whole bigger infrastructure discussion. there's a lot of things that have to move forward. And maybe when it comes to the whole reasoning behind electric buses is to move off of fossil fuels and whatnot. So do you start with the buses, or do we move into property and work on things like transitioning off of the grid and utilizing the large flat roofs and whatnot for solar before we actually go to the end use of like, where's that electric coming from? Like what comes first? Do we do the bus first, or do we actually reduce our footprint pulling from the grid? That's my piece.
Or both, right? And I think it's worthy for more discussion for us as a team of 10 on, do we want to set an objective more broadly for the district on our environmental impact? And I think, a lot of head nodding and side conversations would say it's something that is of great interest, not just to this team of 10, but to the constituents in the community who continue to voice this. And frankly, we should be talking more with the township, because my understanding is the township has also made some level of vision statement and started to make some investments on multiple vehicles and even thinking about all the service vehicles in the township. So maybe there's ways to partner even on infrastructure investments that would need to be made. And then this is all brand new information, right? But as part of the Infrastructure Act, and I believe the Environmental Protection Agency is providing more grants to schools and municipalities. And so I would propose, I know we've spent a lot of time talking about these 4 buses, sorry, Mr. Gray. I would propose, like, if we don't think there's going to be a huge change in pricing over the next months, right? Understanding it does take a year to get these buses in. I would suggest that we don't take this to vote, but instead come back with more information in a future meeting, and really make a trade-off decision at that point to say, is it worth piloting on some level? Do we have access to grant funding? Do we have access to the information that we need to do that? Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely.
Mr. Bedard, if I can I want to make sure for our team that we have clarity. And I appreciate that next month the board is going to be in retreat, so we can have a conversation more broadly about our carbon footprint and the extent to which we'd like to make substantive changes within the district in multiple areas, and to reduce fossil fuel use and potentially look at green roof options. So we can look at through property committee, a more comprehensive plan for being better environmental stewards in multiple ways as a district, and share with the board the ways in which that might be possible, the grant funding that might be available, federal and state grant. We can also connect with the township to see if there's any partnerships on grant funding, or ways in which we can have economy of scale in order to work with them to make sure that things, because we're such a small township, that we should be able to hopefully have some opportunities there. And then specifically with regard to transportation, at a future property committee meeting, we could take a look at a presentation for the board, or we could do it at a board meeting where all 9 members are present. We could give a long-range presentation on specifically transportation, the bus garage, as we've spoken about previously at property, and what are the combined costs of creating a new bus depot that would have the kinds of flexibility and infrastructure that would be needed to theoretically house a fully electric fleet. If that's and that would also include aspects like training of drivers and any other resources that would be necessary in order to make something like that work, so that the board could then consider the extent to which you want to go in on electric busing, the extent to which you want to go in on other options for green ideas. I'll just sort of generalize. Does that make sense? Is that what you're looking for as a team? Okay.
I think that it would be helpful. I think it would be beneficial for it to be a full board meeting as well. That way, that will get the public to see that it is a larger discussion that we're all having. I'm
Okay,
thinking about.
we can do that. We'll put that together for the board for a public meeting so that it can be discussed and considered without a specific motion, but just in the presentation area of the agenda.
So are we discussing moving the decision on these 4 buses as part of that, or are we? Because it sounds like the district still has a need for these 4 buses, and I mean, correct me if we're wrong. We replaced some last year. We put off a decision to replace them the previous year because of COVID and whatnot. But do we anticipate needing to replace more buses again next year? That maybe we could, if the district needs these buses, do we move forward with these and then plan that the discussion on electric comes into play for whatever buses are going to be up for replacement next year?
Correct. Correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Bray, but the 4 buses that we are looking to replace, there's a need to replace them within this year or definitely next year, because there will be some issues. Moving forward, I think these are older buses that are in our fleet and the ones that are requiring the most repair and for us to sink money into. My biggest concern are the 2 buses that no longer have the support for the parts. Those would be my 2 biggest concerns. So at minimum, I would definitely recommend that those buses be replaced and come off the fleet, because I don't want to be put in a position where we don't have the parts or we don't have the support and something happens with those buses that when we're trying to repair them, and because of the age of them, repairs are inevitable. So, I'll let Mr. Bray weigh in on, my recommendation and your thoughts, Mr. DeFranco.
Yes, I would agree with what Ms. Green just commented. The 2 that it is becoming more challenging to service just because of the availability of parts. Neither the chassis manufacturer nor the body manufacturer remain in business anymore. Or I shouldn't say that GM's not in business, but they don't support that chassis anymore. So we are currently able to patch things together. They, again, are both still roadworthy. They're becoming more challenging to make sure we keep them roadworthy. So those, if we were looking at doing a partial replacement, those may be the better idea to do more quickly. I would say, once again, that all 4 vehicles remain roadworthy. I'm confident that at this moment, they are fine. We are going to have to start spending a little bit more. I would say that probably the 2 larger ones only have, we really, knowing that turnaround time for buses, we would definitely want to make sure that they were replaced by about next year, just because the undercarriages are starting to have some rust and rot. That's just the result of being on the road for, 12 to 15 years.
So ultimately, our recommendation would be to replace the 4 in conjunction with this larger conversation that we're having. But if at minimum, it would be the 2. Any thoughts from anybody?
Do we have upcoming board meetings still through the month of June, correct?
Yes.
I'm not on this committee, right? So I'm just giving an opinion. You guys can do whatever you'd like. I would suggest that we, for at least 2 of the buses, give ourselves the opportunity to have Mr. Bray go to this EPA conference and do a little bit of research on grants, there's some brand new grants that are available, and potentially put off the decision on the other 2 buses for a period of weeks or months, right, to give us the opportunity to do a little bit more research. But totally comfortable if there's a urgent need on these buses that are not supported on getting some of them through. And I'm not sure what that does for negotiations or whatever else, but that's my opinion to send to the rest of the Finance Committee.
Is everybody in agreement with that?
I think so. I'm as interested as well to see what comes out of your conference that you're going to. So I would be good to move forward with the 2 that we definitely need to replace, and then just kind of revisit for the other two in a month or two to see what we're all thinking and see what you guys have got together information wise and all of that.
I guess it'd be interesting to just, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, go ahead, Sarah. Sorry.
I guess it'd be interesting to hear from you, Mr. Bray, too, on that decision. Does it raise any concerns of what we're recommending from your perspective?
No, that's workable, most certainly. And again, right now we know that pricing is very fluid, as is vehicle availability. So for us to say we're to be very honest, as we said, having trouble getting the pricing hammered down anyway. So to say that we want to slow down by a couple of weeks should not be a major impact either way.
Okay. And then Ms. Green, for the budgeting process, does this affect you adversely in any way for us to make this delay? Okay.
Absolutely not. No, the funding from this is coming from the capital reserve fund, so that doesn't impact our operating budget that will be voted on in the upcoming meetings.
Great, thank you. I just wanted to hear from staff perspective before we decided. But yeah, so I think Mr. Bedard's suggestion I would co-sign on as well.
But my one follow-up is just, and this is for Mr. Bray, forward looking for next year, what's on the radar bus-wise for this discussion, you know, next spring or whenever this gets revisited?
Certainly. So we currently, we're approaching a little bit of a lull. Next year, there likely will still be a couple of units that we would recommend replacing, just based again on their age and the condition of the vehicles. I don't have my entire list right in front of me right now. I apologize. I'm more than happy to get that back out to Dr. Yannicone so she can communicate it, excuse me, back out to you. But we are happily approaching a point where the board a few years back approved a large purchase of vehicles and started doing that capital reserve transfer. We are nearing the point where we're going to see a lull in purchases other than an occasional one here or there, up until we would potentially be heading back into a larger purchase again. A decent number of vehicles in our fleet are a model year 2016. So obviously it'll be a few years down the road before we're looking at really getting back heavily into large vehicle purchases, which, as far as this electric conversation goes, can be a benefit to us. You know, we have all of a sudden large group of vehicles that over the course of 2 to 3 years, unless we drastically change what our replacement plans are, we would be looking all of a sudden at turning over a large number of our large school buses. That said, I'm more than happy to get a little bit more detail to Dr. Yannicone to send it back out to you.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Okay, if there's no more questions or comments on this topic, we're going to move forward with the 2 buses that we identified and then hold off on the other 2 for the larger conversation and some feedback from Mr. Bray from his upcoming conference and some additional research. So we'll move forward with that action item on Monday and follow up at future meetings between this meeting and property meeting for that larger conversation. Okay, thank you. So our next agenda item is the 2022-2023 proposed final budget. I'm going to share my screen. I believe Dr. Yannicone provided resent the slides that were presented at last meeting. And also the slide that was requested for a look at going to 2.5. So I'm just going to present this. Can everybody see that? Yes. Okay. So I'm just going to keep this up and just do a very quick recap on the presentation that was done last meeting. We recommended and presented a budget with a 2.8% tax increase. We identified some of the items that are coming out of the recommended budget, including use of ARP ESSER funding, which will support 4 new hires. There will also be new hires that are supported in the just regular general operating budget with the 2.8% increase. With the 2.8% increase, we're looking at use of $1.4 million in fund balance. In that discussion, there was a discussion to see what a 2.5% increase would look like. That is what we increased last year. So I did that analysis. That information was sent to the committee, but I don't believe we had discussion on it. So at this point, what we are looking for, and in that analysis, we identified that if we went to 2.5, it obviously increases our use of fund balance. Or if we did not want to increase our use of fund balance, what items would be identified that we couldn't move forward with. And we looked at the fact that we would have to layer out our technology implementation that we plan on doing with the 2.8% increase with use of the fund balance. So at this point, these are what all the options look like. Again, Act 1 index is 3.4. So we went from 2.5, showing what our use of fund balance and what the additional revenue would be for generating that, and what the impact on the median homeowner would be. At this point, for procedural purposes, we are required to adopt a proposed final budget. That adoption will happen at Monday's meeting. At this point, we're looking for, we're sitting on the recommendation of 2.8, and I'm looking for feedback from the committee on if that recommendation needs to change for the proposed final. Just for the new committee members, and just a refresher for those committee members, we still have one more vote before the budget is final. That will happen at the second meeting in June, and that'll be the final budget. So this is just part of the procedure that the Department of Ed puts us through with our budget timeline. So there has to be an action item on a proposed final budget. That does not mean that budget can't change between the proposed final and the final. But at this point, we are recommending this budget and just looking for feedback for Monday's meeting.
Can I ask a clarification question?
Sure.
Just to make sure I'm understanding correctly, in the 2.5 scenario that you're presenting here, what you're suggesting is that nothing would change in terms of staffing services, like the budget wouldn't change. What we would just do in that case is just draw more from the fund balance. Is that correct? But nothing would actually change in terms of operations.
There's actually two options, depending on the direction the board wants to go with use of fund balance. Either we do a 2.5 and the difference is supplemented through use of fund balance, so it would increase the use of fund balance. If the board did not want to use additional fund balance on top of the recommended number, then we would have to look at cutting expenditures. So there's two paths that you can follow when you're looking at the 2.5. So that would just be the direction of where the board would want to go, if they would want to use overall use more fund balance, or would say to administration, we don't want to use additional fund balance. We need you to cut expenditures to get us to a 2.5. So there's two options.
So Ms. Hughes, if I can just clarify, so the slide you're looking at right now assumes that we will do everything that was in the preliminary budget presentation, all staffing, all technology adjustment, assess all of that. If the board would like to use less fund balance, what we have looked at in any area, what we have looked at is taking a look at what we've allocated for technology purchases. And there are four main areas. Just as a refresher, in the technology purchases, we're suggesting that if the board would like to go with 2.5 and the 1.4 fund balance, then we would stretch out over 2 years the completion of the smart boards. They're slated at the middle and high school to be completed in all classrooms this summer, assuming the board approves the preliminary proposed final. Not the preliminary, let me correct myself, the proposed final. Thank you, Ms. Green, I see it. That would allow us to order the boards and have them in place for the start of the new school year. That's the option we're looking at currently, if the board would like to go with a lower tax increase and less use of fund balance, lower use of fund balance. The other technology areas are all new Chromebooks for our 6th, 7th, and 8th graders. They are 4-year-old devices. And so we have them slated for replacement this summer. We try to go on a 4-year rotation. The second is that there is there are labs at the high school in our elective areas in technology and in some of the arts that we would like to replace their very old devices. They're 10 to 12 years old. And then we'd like to replace our instructional support technology so that they can better support students. And then we have the smart boards. So we have 4 areas of technology that we're working on, making purchases and improvements this summer. But we're open to whatever the board, this committee suggests, we'll bring Monday night for approval.
So just, and I think that you explained that pretty clearly, but I just want to clarify, because when I was looking at the smart boards, we currently have smart boards. We're just looking at the newest generation. And Dr. Taratuski, I'm sorry, you put your hand up and I just started talking without looking. I apologize.
Right.
I just want to clarify, like, will there be needs that are going unmet? Or is it just not the latest and the greatest? And I completely understand the drawbacks of old technology. I just want to make sure, like, are we going to be hurting our instructional capabilities if we do this delay, or is it just like, you know, it would be nice to have, but we can survive? I'm sorry if I'm not making myself clear.
No, absolutely. I've asked the administrative team to present requests as needs, wants, or wishes. Okay, so needs are, this has to happen. We need to make this a priority this year. Wants are, we would very much like this. We can make do. And wishes are, the dreams of what could be, much like we just discussed with the buses. And so I would put this in a want category in order to bring us to the best position we could be in instructional design. So over the course of the last 3 to 4 years, we have really improved the software programming, and we've provided all of our staff new technology devices, and the students, again, would be receiving new Chromebooks. There's a power to those. There's a capacity in those devices that warrants stronger smart boards. Our smart boards are currently 10 to 12 years old. They vary from classroom to classroom. We've already replaced this year the boards that were failing, that we were really struggling in order to have them be used consistently, and were regularly needing interaction with the tech director and the techs in the buildings in order to make them work well. There is a strong desire on the part of the faculty for us to give them the new boards, because some of their neighbors on the hall have the new ones and they have older ones. We started by replacing all of the Erdenheim boards. We put the emphasis on our youngest learners. Enfield had already had them when we built the new building. And so at the middle and high school, currently what's left in those buildings are 10 to 12-year-old boards. They do not consistently sync with our newer software. So they're able to be used for some lessons and not for others. So it would be ideal for us to be able to move everybody forward this summer. But we want to make sure that in prioritizing each of those technology areas, we're trying to minimize impact on students and on student learning. So I wouldn't call them a need, but I would call them a firm want.
It sounds like they're borderline need based on your description of not being able to consistently use the other things that we've invested in. And I guess my only follow-up to that is, if they're strong wants, borderline needs now, they're going to become needs next year. How's that going to impact the increase that we have to discuss next year? Does it then become bigger than it would have been had we stepped appropriately now? Like, I'm just, my background concern here is, if we don't take up enough of this Act 1 index capability now, kick the can down the road, is the increase going to be too large next year to the point where it becomes more painful?
It's a great question, and I will say part of the reason, much like we just discussed with the buses, that we want to act now is that we don't know that we're going to be able to get all 45 or 47 boards this summer. The supply chain is variable. And so we're hopeful that if the board approves the proposed final on Monday night, we will order these boards. That'll give us the best chance of having them received by the district over the summer and installed for the start of the school year. But as you know, over the last few years, we have had some items delayed. We had technology a year ago that didn't arrive until December that was ordered in June with a hope of September installation. So we're aware that the boards are aging, the manpower to maintain them is increasing. And so that's why we're recommending it. So we are recommending the 2.8 and the 1.4 because we do feel like then we can meet all of the educational needs of the students. But we do understand that finances are challenging this year for families, and we want to be responsive if the board would like to go at a lower number.
That was really my question is, you know, what is the ultimate impact on education for the student? You know, and does it interfere with daily instruction, access to instruction for students, et cetera? So.
The answer is yes. It has the potential to do that.
Okay.
Any other comments regarding this?
So what we're asking for is a motion to move at 2.8 and 1.4 out of committee to Monday night's meeting.
I would make that motion.
I would support that.
I do as well. But thank you for doing all this additional discovery for us. So we really, you know, have a good understanding of the decision that we are making. So I agree with your recommendation for the 2.8.
Yeah, I want to echo what Ms. Lipinski said. That I hope it doesn't feel like this work was done in vain for us to then just vote, you know, on moving it forward. But I really wanted to make sure I had a more informed perspective on this. And then I think just related to the conversation we had earlier, some things it's making me think about is like, if we did have sort of like an environmental or a fossil fuel divestment plan eventually, kind of in the same ways that we have the equity plan, and to Dr. Teretuski's point of like thinking about our values and not just the finances, I can imagine next year sort of approaching this slightly differently if we're saying, okay, we have a divestment plan over the next 10 years, like the decisions we make around the money might be slightly different. So just wanted to note that as well.
I think one of the things, I'll speak from a technology standpoint, the board has approved our 5-year cybersecurity plan, which as you'll recall, the costs are front loaded in the first year, and some of them are being offset by ESSER dollars. So that's a positive. With this transition, we will have a year from now the intention of replacing the Chromebooks at Erdenheim. So we're trying to have one building every 4 years, right? So that each building, the children are getting new devices roughly every 4 years, which, as you know, with technology is about as long as you want to stretch, given what's available out there. So we're now on a cycle with the technology, so we shouldn't have large bumps in those costs. The boards, as you just heard, are lasting us about 10 to 12 years. So hopefully we will be a decade away from needing an upgrade there again. We've upgraded the faculty devices this year. We're upgrading the instructional support staff next year. And we've already settled 2 of the 3 major negotiations with our groups, with STESPA and Act 93 completed, and we're going into STEA in the fall. So I think we do have 1 more year of a lift with the Teachers Association and wanting the Erdenheim devices to be upgraded. But I do want us to keep in mind some of the things we've already mentioned, which is there are hopefully grant funds available with regard to greening, transportation, and other areas of the district that could help us offset. We've completed the major construction project at Enfield, so we're in good shape there. And then in addition to that, I do think, I think that overall as a district, we can be mindful of the fact that we do have a very healthy fund balance. And so if we wanted to use more of fund balance in order to offset the cost of some of these greening initiatives, that's another area the board could consider. Rather than increasing taxes or offsetting those costs.
Can you just quickly remind me again what our increase last year was?
It was 2.5.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
I think the index was 2, was it 3.0 last year?
3. I think the
Three.
index was 3
We went
last year. and it's
2.5. This
3.4.
year's index is 3.4.
We're going
Mhm.
You would be coming in at 2.8.
Yeah.
The next
Okay.
2-year indexes are anticipated to be 4.3 each respectively. And then there's an anticipated drop after that.
Mhm.
Just really quickly, I'd like to piggyback on Mr. DeFranco's comment about where tax increases fall and making sure that we're doing our due diligence to make sure that we're not going to hit in a year where we have to spike. We are really, really trying to level it out so that we do not have to come to the board. Like Dr. Yannicone said, the next 2 years anticipation is 4.3. That's a decent increase on taxes. So our plan is to try to make sure that we're mitigating that by ensuring that we are building our millage the way that we need to in the years that we have to, with everything that's going on. I think a lot of districts with COVID, things slowed down a lot as far as spending, as far as replacing anything, because of the impact of COVID on education. And what's happening right now is as buildings are opening and education is coming back into full swing and back to normal as possible, spending has to happen because that spending got deferred over 2 years. And the grant funding has assisted considerably, but also it's balancing out the operational budget to make sure that we are absorbing the needs that we need to do, such as the smart boards. While yes, there are smart boards in classrooms, we've upgraded other areas in technology at the high school where the students have new devices that aren't working that great with our smart board technology. So we obviously want to address those educational needs. And we want to make sure that we do that in a responsible way to the taxpayers. So we are looking and very conscious when we have discussions about budget that we don't want to come to the board 1 year at 2.5 and then the following year at 4.3, because we are trying to absorb operational costs that are needed for the education of our students. And Dr. Yannicone did mention we had we're having 3 rounds of negotiations, so you have to put that into play as well. So I think, I appreciate the support on the 2.8 on moving that forward. And we consistently just try to make sure that, we're being fiscally responsible to our taxpayers when we ask for these tax increases.
Okay. Thank you. Appreciate all of the work that you do. This is a lot of work to prepare and a lot of thinking and consideration and planning.
I just want to, I want to thank you all for the really thoughtful questions and for the direction the board provides us on a regular basis. I feel like over the last 2 months, we've had great conversation about where the board wants to land. And I also want to compliment Ms. Green because we're adding this cybersecurity, some needed technology purchases, and a number of new staff positions. And while some of that was offset by the ESSER dollars, Ms. Green found ways to create economy and efficiency in the district in order to keep us under the index. So it was a pretty successful hat trick, I think, for her to get us where we are. So I want to thank her for all the work she's done.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, if there's no further comments or questions, we are going to, for Monday, be prepared to present a proposed final budget at the recommended 2.8 with the use of $1.4 million in fund balance. There will need to be a formal vote on Monday, and then there has to be a 30-day waiting period before we can vote on the final budget. I do not anticipate that there will be anything that comes in that shakes and rattles the budget, that there will be any change from the proposed final to the final. State funding is still out there. We're not sure where that's going to land. There might just be some nuances because of timing with things. The homestead money has come in. It's actually an increase from last year. I think we are starting to finally see the fruits of that initiative. So I believe we were about 1.8 last year. It came in at 2.26. For those of you that need a refresher on what the homestead money is, that's the money that gets passed along to the taxpayers for rebate that are eligible. So we have about 5,200 properties within our township that are eligible. It is a little over $400 this year that they will get rebated on their taxes. So I think that that is a positive thing. So just those little nuances, and it's just protocol on how it ends in May and June for budget, but those will be the two action items that we need from the board to finalize budget for next year.
Great, thanks.
Okay, if there's nothing else, we'll look to adjourn. I just also want to thank the board for all of your support during the budget process. It's really appreciated. Okay, have a great day, everybody. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Thanks for everything. Take care.
Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.